Welcome to How to Disaster. Today we have a double hitter. We have two people that I like and respect so much. We have Dr. Daniel Aldrich from Northeastern University, and we also have Renae Hanvin, who is from Australia. I met Renae in 2020 when we were both keynoting for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She had started working with Dr. Aldrich about a year before that in 2019. They have spent the past 7 years putting together a really remarkable program that really shows us how our relationships to each other actually are game changers in how communities recover, but also build resilience. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it, and thank you once again for spending your time with us on How to Disaster. Renae Hanvin and Dr. Daniel Aldrich, thank you for being here. Welcome to the How to Disaster podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, thanks for having us.
I want to actually start with you, Renae, because we have it's beyond a professional relationship. It's a personal relationship too. And I met Renae in, believe 2020 when Brooks Nelson from Walmart, when he was with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, he put us on a COVID keynote that was virtual together. And he said, I think you two should know each other. And we did it. It was great. We totally enjoyed it. And then we came off of that and we immediately wanted to be friends. And I was very, very fortunate because after 5 years of, being virtual friends. Luckily, she was able to come to do a keynote at the Wildfire Leadership Summit last year. We were very excited to meet in person. Although I will say it already felt very comfortable. Like it was weird for me to think that we had not already met in person because we've been a good support for each other over the years. And Renae was the very first person I ever interviewed. It wasn't the first one for a podcast. It wasn't the first one that we aired, but it was the first one we interviewed, and I actually forgot to hit record until the end when I hit it. And then it was like an exercise in how to be a supportive colleague and friend. She was like, that's okay, we'll do it again. And we have a big time change between us, and her children are under the age of 6 and they were in the other room. So I have an affection for her that is far beyond being a colleague. I really respect her work, but I wanted to so that's why I'm starting with Renae today, and then we'll move over to Daniel Aldrich. But I was wondering if you could actually talk about your work. Like you've built your work around the idea that resilience lives in relationships. And I'm very excited about the work you've been doing with Dr. Aldrich over the last 6 years. That's really what we're going to focus in on here. But can you ground us in what that actually looks like in a real community? What led you there?
Yeah. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. And yes, just checking we've pressed record this time. So no, as you know, for me, resilience is all about people. It's who you know. It's how you help each other. And way back, I think it was probably about 10 years ago, I had this crazy idea that, it's not about just bridges and warning systems. It's actually about, people coming together to collaborate. And Professor Aldrich was presenting at a session. And to be honest with you, I'd heard so much about him. I'm like, oh, yeah, whatever. And I went to this, I kind of accidentally got invited to this sort of quite small kind of group gathering. And then I'm like, oh, mate, he is actually literally measuring and doing what I keep telling people to do when no one's listening to me. So I kind of stalked him a little bit on LinkedIn, and then he agreed to join a volunteer on my advisory group. And that really was a game changer for me because it enabled me to not just talk about the fact that people connections are so important before, during, and after disasters. But now I had this dude from America who was measuring it as well. So he kind of subtly started, understanding what I wanted to do, which was quite different to what he wanted to do. And I think so, in terms of where I was when we first met compared to where I am now, it's a massive leap forward in the sense that, we've created something that can, I guess, quantify and demonstrate visually that people connections are absolutely the foundation of great communities in a normal day, but also in times of disasters. So, yeah, big step forward.
Big step forward and really a game changer in so many ways for those of us who our primary work is in social infrastructure and social capital. So if I can turn to you now, Daniel. I really want to just call you Dr. Aldrich, but I'm just not going to do that. So you spent over 2 decades studying this, from Japan after the tsunamis to the work you're doing with Renae now to the work that you're doing on wildfires and other disasters. It's so unusual. It is such, it's going to be such a gift. It already is to so many of us in this space. Can you give us the background on how you came to this work and give us some of your actual, like where you decided to lean into certain parts of it? Because it is an unusual space and a really hard one to quantify. And we're so lucky that you've not only done this work for 20 years, but then paired up with Renae. So can you talk about what led you to this?
Sure. It was really a bad set of initial job offerings. When my wife and I finished grad school, the only really offer I had was from Tulane University in New Orleans. And at that time, back in 2005, I was working on a very niche area of nerdy Japanese energy politics, which no North American cares at all about. So we moved down in July of 2005, and we just began settling into a home. We bought our first car because I finally had income as a professor, right? I'd been a grad student for many years on $18,000 a year. So we finally had enough money to actually buy a car and, fill a house with books and furniture. And then, of course, Hurricane Katrina arrived the 28th of August, 2005. So that was really a pivot for me away from that nerdy Japanese energy project question into something much more interesting, I think, which is to say that, we sort of studied myself first, what happened to us. And I had this very naive conception that what would happen would be FEMA would come knocking on my door with a big 6-foot check, like the American Clearinghouse sweepstakes, right? And say, Daniel, don't worry, here's enough money to get back on your feet. We've got this. You're gonna do great. And of course, we had to first fax in our FEMA application, which I think was about 4 pages long, and it never got there. And of course, we're on the road, right? We're on the road trying to fax it in, literally in our car driving west to Houston. And of course, every fax fails. We're at Kinko's and FedEx, and it's never getting through because FEMA is jammed. And then when it finally got through, and it took a few weeks to get through, it was rejected. Our application for help from FEMA did not get accepted. So that check, that big 6-foot check, never showed up. And then the other naive conception I had was that the market would save us. That if the state isn't going to be there as one pillar, it's going to be the insurance market, right? We're going to get money for our insurer. And funny enough, we didn't activate our insurance in time to work for the disaster. So neither the state nor the market came through for us. And what did come through for us, though, sitting in a very small hotel room in Houston, were friends of friends, family members that we hadn't heard from in years, a Boy Scout troop in Detroit, a synagogue operating out of New York. And my wife and I were back then on flip phones, right, getting all these offers. Hey, we heard you're in trouble. Do you need a place to stay? We heard your kids are with you. Do you need a place for them to go to school? We heard you have no possessions, which was true. We literally had nothing but the clothes on our back and a small bag of toys. You need a place for the kids to go rest or go to camp this semester. So all the offers came through our networks. And that really, for me, was this pivot. I began thinking, if my experiences have so much dependence on people that we know, what about someone living in India, for example? What about someone living in Japan 100 years ago? And that was really off to the races for me when our own experiences then drove this. Finding Renae a long time later was a godsend, right? Because, of course, the idea that what you can discover in your own country also works in another country really is this fantastic feeling. Like, wow, holy smokes, there is something really universal about the way that these connections work.
Did you get pushback initially, though, when you're like, this is going to be the focus of my work? Because that all has to be funded, too.
Pushback, more like skepticism, I think, which is that, I was trained as a political scientist, and most people in political science study politics, meaning who's voting for whom and why, and party ID and gender and age and all that kind of stuff. And that never really hit it for me anyway. And then this whole question about what factors drive the recovery process touches on politics. But I think what Renae and I would both agree with would be that in many cases, you see good and bad recoveries under the same governor or the same mayor or the same leader. So it can't just be about, is President so-and-so in charge or Prime Minister so-and-so in charge? Although, of course, that does set the stage for things. So I think it was more skepticism that, hey, Daniel, have you gone off the area of political science into some new weird area and we'll never see you again? Inside
Answer
this, yes. So, and that's kind of what happened. I did leave the bounded area of political science and kind of wander off to have conversations with people like Renae.
Well, we're so glad that you did. And thank you for the personal side of that story. And it reminded me to go back to Renae and say, what's your personal story for why you ended up in this work? Because I don't think very many of us end up in it intentionally.
No, it's kind of weird. Well, I mean, I've got a corporate background and I've done a lot of work in corporate social responsibility, but I had three, I guess, situations happen to me, funnily enough, a couple while I was in America. So the first one was I was camping in the epicenter of an earthquake in California, and I was like, oh, okay, yep. And then sort of that wasn't too dramatic. Then I was actually on the last plane allowed to land on the east coast of America on September 11. So I was living in London at the time. So I found myself, I guess, a stranger in the community of Boston. We got diverted to Boston, funnily enough, where Daniel, I think, was living at the time as well, but we never quite met then. And that really opened my eyes to, I guess, you know, a community coming together, people welcoming me, helping me, even though they didn't know me from a bar of soap. And then another one in London, I was actually a couple of tubes ahead of the a London bombing, actually. So I guess when I came back to Australia, I really started looking at, well, you know, what happens in disasters here? And I was actually working for the National Postal Service when Brisbane, one of the main cities in Australia, flooded. And I was watching the help that was going out to the communities and mainly the small businesses, and just really recognised that there was not much going out there at all. And those small business people, you know, it's not only protecting their lives, but also their livelihoods. They were just left on their own. So that really, I guess, you know, ignited a bit of a passion inside me around helping the people in the businesses, because they are true leaders in communities. They're connectors into their employees, their customers, their suppliers. They support the local community. So, yeah, that was really, I guess, where I got into this space before I started stalking Professor Aldrich.
See, LinkedIn actually has some very good applications to it. So I love that. And I share a lot of this stuff that both of you put out there, because it's such a powerful tool that you've created both together and separately for so many of us who work in this space. It's demanding, you know, KPIs and data. And I remember you saying to me once, Renae, you were like, just ask them, what outcome do you want? And that works for a while, but when you get into really asking for millions of dollars, it doesn't work quite as well. And so, Daniel, if I can turn it back to you. So really, Renae is on the practitioner side and you're from the research side. Are we now at the point where we can say clearly social ties are one of the strongest predictors of recovery? And tell us what the data says to you and how you gathered it, because that is for those of us who are not scientists, it's a mystery. So Daniel, can you answer that for me?
Sure, yeah. And I would say, you know, it's hard to have a truth in social science that can't be challenged. And I can think of all kinds of things that have kind of gone the way of the dodo, right? Theories, hypotheses that get raised up and they get shot down eventually. There's pretty consistent evidence. And this is why I was so excited to work with Renae, besides the fact that she's a cool person, is that in Australia, in Japan, in North America, in Mexico as well, all the countries that my lab has worked, these ties between people have had the same impact. So it isn't just like in North America, it works occasionally only if you're wealthy, or in Australia, it only works if you're living in the countryside. It's that across time and space, and by the way, it's a very nerdy thing to say, but I would say one of my first books was on 1923 Tokyo. So literally 100 years ago, I have data from very micro local communities, over 70 of them across the city. And I can show that in those communities where there were stronger social connections, recovery went faster. More people came back to the community. So how do we measure this stuff? Well, again, as a big data nerd, where I was thinking about how do we capture a phenomenon that we can feel intuitively? Like you can kind of feel if someone's isolated and alone, they look different, if someone's really engaged, if someone's got people talking to them, if they're out there knowing all their neighbors' names, or signs you don't need to be a PhD, right, to hold those kind of information. But what the nerds like me try to do is figure out, okay, we have that intuition, we have that feeling, where can we find data that someone else who's a skeptic would believe? So that might be from the census. We've used census data. It might be surveys, and Renae has done amazing jobs doing 500 plus surveys across Australia. It might be from us literally texting people and asking them randomly information. It might be phone calls that we do to a broader set of areas. So for us, we try to find data where it sits. If the data is easily accessible through surveys, great, we'll do that. If it has to be through focus groups, okay, we'll do that. If it's one-on-one conversations with leaders, we'll do that. We really want to not get tied down to thinking there's only one way to measure stuff. And I think really the strength we'll get to, I guess, eventually with Renae's work is when she's measuring in Australia these social ties, it isn't just one measure that she has. For example, for bonding ties or bridging or for linking, Renae's put the time in to make sure we have 4, 5, 6 measures for the same thing. So it isn't just, for example, are people volunteering in the community? Are they also joining groups, for example? Are they giving blood, right? We have all the different ways to capture that. In bonding ties, it isn't just a question of, right, are you in the area for a long time? Is it how similar are you to your neighbors, geographically, economically, racially, all these kind of cool things. So, some countries like Australia have tons of data floating in it. Some places I've been, like in India, you really have to work a lot harder to bring that data home. So what we try to do is find culturally relevant and on-top data, things that are relevant to the topic, that are appropriate. 1923 Tokyo, only men with land could vote. So we couldn't use voting. Same thing in Australia in the 2020s, right? Australia voting is mandatory. But in North America, voting rates correlate really, really well with civic engagement, which is one of the ways we capture, for example, being involved in a community. Big thing of social capital. So again, you have to know enough about the community, which is why, again, a partner like Renae makes this work. If I didn't have Renae, I'd be stumbling around Australia, still asking people they voted in the last election.
That's actually a perfect segue to kick it back to Renae and say, Renae, explain what terms we just heard from Dr. Aldrich, bonding ties. Explain this project that you all have been doing together.
I think that's probably my biggest job, is translating, I guess, the academic theory and the amazing work that Professor Aldrich has done. So very much, I think why Daniel and I work so well together is because he is a phenomenal, I guess, academic researcher. Like, his brain is extraordinary, and, he's going to have to pay me later for that. But on the other side of the fence, I think really differently. So I'm very much around, like, what does that mean? How can we use it? How's it going to help? So I guess my role in the collaboration that we've had, and we're very grateful, we got just under $1 million from the Australian government alongside the South Australian government to create a national framework and pilot an approach. But my approach is, I very much was like, I've got to translate this to Australia, whole of Australia, and make sure that it is relevant to the whole of Australia, not excluding, but we haven't done in-depth First Nations approaches. So just to note that as well. So very much, the process for me was around, like, I get that you've done it in all these other countries, and I get that you've got all these theories of it, but I want to make sure that I can wake up every morning and be 100% confident that is actually going to work, and it's going to work for Australia. So Daniel mentioned before, we measure for social capital, bonding, bridging, and linking ties. So I even, I didn't recreate definitions, because that would be stupid, because I'm not an academic. But what I did create was descriptors. So for Australia, how do we talk about social capital? So the descriptor we've created is that it's the connections, trust, and cooperation between people. That's how we describe it. That's how we talk about it. That's how we're embedding it across the country, that everyone talks about it. And then measuring bonding ties, which are connections with people similar to you. Bridging ties, connections with people different to you. So Jennifer, you and I are very strong bridging ties now. And then linking ties, which are connections with people like me, normal civic people, and those in roles of authority and power. So what I recognize, though, is that in this world where we just want to fund, things we can touch and see, is that we needed maps to demonstrate the levels of ties and the strengths of ties, because if you don't measure it, then you can't see it. And if you can't see it, literally, in a map, then you're not going to invest in it. So I think, but the main thing that I probably drove Daniel totally mad was we validated it 4 times. So I think normally he does it, once, twice, 4 times. So we did academic research in all the papers, we did the census data, we did qualitative and quantitative research, but also I had sessions with mayors and CEOs of local councils of the pilot communities, literally saying that, and we are measuring a global first, which is down to the SA1 block level. But I remember having a great chat with the mayor of Whyalla, a regional town in South Australia, and I'm like, there's 2 areas here that I don't think are right. So can you just tell me about them? And he's right, Renae, you are totally right. And could just explain to me why they were right. So at the moment, again, a lot of the data we're using is, high national data, so we can look to expand and scale it up across the whole of Australia. But, we've got mayors of country towns telling us the data is right. So the opportunity that's here is huge, and it's a great partnership between, Daniel and myself. So
Daniel, is this the first time you've had a partner like Renae? And what made you say yes? Like, I'm always curious because it is called How to Disaster, and we do want people to innovate, but also accepting that invitation. I'm sure she, what made you accept her invitation, and what was that experience like in your work?
Renae is relentless. She seems really nice right now on this call, right? She seems just like a normal Australian CEO, right, of a social enterprise. But she is relentless in that I've had plenty of other people around the world say, hey, this sounds really nice. Let's have tea. And then they'll say, I'll get back to you. And things just go really quiet. And Renae said to me, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make this not just for you talking about this, to the 8 people that you talk to when you're here in Australia. We're going to do a full pilot project. We're going to get you back here. We're going to spend time getting a full-time GS person to work with you on this. And we're going to scale up to the national level. Now, it sounded at the time like Renae was really crazy, absolutely mad, raving crazy. But what she was relentless. So she said, I will put my heart and soul into getting this done. Now, on the academic side, for me, the coin of my realm is academic papers. Renae doesn't care about that at all. She wants to see, does this actually help the average Australian? Can a mayor, a town council person, a premier, can this help them? Right? So it's a completely different way of thinking about the world. And it really opened my eyes to the degree that many academics like myself, we do live in, even if we're not in a ivory tower, whatever that means, we're pretty isolated from the kind of decisions that are being made, the kind of things people need out there. And we're often content just to do a paper and walk away from it. And Renae is not. Right? She's going to take that idea, how did you measure that in Japan or America? Okay, that's not going to work here. It doesn't make any sense. Or we have not about this yet, but social infrastructure. Where are the spaces and places in society? Oh yeah, Daniel, that's not going to work here either. So she was much more rigorous in many ways than the kind of peer review I get in a journal, because she's thinking not about this abstract theory thing, but does this make sense for a mayor? Does this make sense for someone on the ground? An NGO, what they would call a social enterprise, can they use this information, right, to help people living there? And that was a fantastically fresh perspective. And again, because Renae kept it up, rather than just saying to me, that sounds good and walking away, she kept pushing. And she mentioned she won $1 million from the Australian government, right? She has all kinds of plans right now to keep going further and further out in ways that none of my other partners have really done. I have worked with other people, but again, I will have to give Renae the gold star because she is the one who did not let go and just kept pushing it further and further. And that's really a tremendously hard partner. It's a rare partner to find. And I'm tremendously grateful that Renae sees this as an important thing, because again, many people will say after this podcast, yeah, sounds nice. Let's pay the mortgage now, or let's go watch, Bridgerton, whatever. But for Renae, it was like, no, this idea is so important. We're not going to let it go.
Well, and I do think Renae's approach in general has been different since, we've had so many conversations about it because our approach is different too. And that's often met with skepticism if you're not falling in line with the traditional way that disaster is done. And, her podcast is doing disasters differently. Am I getting that right? I think I'm getting that right. And so I have always been sort of fortified by knowing that she exists out there. And when you have to borrow courage so that you can continue to exist in a way that is not completely like what everybody else is doing. I think it's really important, but I do think that the work you guys are doing is actually meeting the moment, because we're having so much trouble globally, but especially here in America with our ties to each other, and it is not serving us. We are struggling in so many ways, while we're also globally facing increasing perils. So much appreciation for the work. Renae, can you explain how you chose the 2 communities, though, to do your initial pilot in, and your approach there?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually had 3 pilot communities in the end. So because South Australia, which is a state in Australia, were, I guess, our lead agency. And I just want to call out to Johanna and Miriam, who basically just said, Renae, we'll give you some funding to sort of scope so we did a snapshot first. And that was, Daniel came over for a forum, and we thought we'd have about 25 people. But I was like, no, I'm inviting cross-government people here and whatever. And and we had to end up hiring in plastic chairs. We had about 75 people, but that was a snapshot project to say, you know, do you want this? Like, is this going to help? And clearly, absolutely. So because South Australia was our main lead state, we wanted to choose 3 communities that were quite different. So we chose Adelaide. Adelaide's their main city. It's kind of a smaller city for Australia, but it's a great, you know, test of that kind of structure, lots of systems and certain types of people obviously living there. We then chose Kangaroo Island, which was, it's very remote. It's literally a little tiny island off Australia. They were very greatly impacted by the bushfires we had here in 2019, 2020. So that I thought would be a really interesting community as well. And then we chose Whyalla, which is a regional town that's going through a lot of industrial change. Hasn't had a lot of disasters per se, but certainly going through a lot of change. Look, we would love to do every community, and the aim is to scale up across the whole of Australia, but we wanted to show 3 quite different communities that would give us different data that, again, we could test. And it's been great. And I have to say, the city of Adelaide, so the town one, or the main city one that we did, I literally came off a session last week where they have embedded social capital and social infrastructure, not just into their disaster approach, but into their community wellbeing strategy moving forward. Like, it's a whole priority, which is phenomenal. Like, that is amazing. And so, again, as Daniel mentioned before, I call myself probably resilient more than persistent, or whatever word he used. But that's the outcome, I guess, you know, that I'm aiming for. Like, if I can get, you know, state governments to, or, you know, main cities to embed the notion of social capital and social infrastructure into their strategies for community well-being, not just disasters, like that is a good day. That is gold. Then we just need to get them to measure it.
Yes. You know, what was striking to me is that until I went through a disaster, I probably thought very much like Daniel, which was, you know, the cavalry's going to come, you're going to tell me what to do, and I'm going to follow this well thought out plan for my community. And it's probably always the same across all communities. And I also did not anticipate the scale of human kindness. And I am positive that this is what has kept me in this work for so long, because every single community that we go to, I see the exact same level of human kindness, from the frontier to the rural to suburban to island. I love that you chose an island in there as well. So I'm wondering, Daniel, like, what was the moment that you started to recognize this particular facet of disaster? Was it in your work in Japan when you first started 20 years ago? Was it something that you experienced during Katrina? I mean, I know that you have that in there from people calling, but when did you know that this was common? Like, I have behind me A Paradise Built in Hell. I love that book. And
Rebecca
it let me know that, that we were not alone. So can you talk about, like, when did you realize that this was common and a strength of disaster as opposed to an anomaly?
Yeah, I was really lucky, right? So in that period after Tulane was closed for the entire fall semester 2005, I'm just sitting nerdily trying to process my anger and frustration by reading stuff. So I'm reading through all this material, economics literature, sociology, psychology, geographical stuff, and it's not really unsatisfying. So I put together a plan to convince others that my own personal experiences were in fact universal, and applied to what was back then called the Abe Fellowship, which unfortunately no longer exists. But the Abe Fellowship allowed you to go to multiple countries on the same research project. So I proposed going to an area near Chennai in India, the southeast coast, near Tamil Nadu state, after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. I proposed the 1923 Tokyo earthquake, the 1995 Kobe earthquake, and then returning to my initial job, 2005 Hurricane Katrina. And, you know, when you're writing a book, oftentimes you have piles. I mean, literally back then it was taking notes and putting it together folders. And I began to realize the evidence I had from not just my own experiences, but seeing historically back in time, looking at in 1995 in Kobe, Japan, in 2004. Now, India, of course, much less developed than Japan at both those points, far more rural, much more illiteracy. But even there, a lot of quantitative evidence I could find that having stronger ties into the in-group brought aid. For example, I could measure in rupees and days in camps. the kind of aid people did or didn't get, depending on their connections they had to other people. We had even things like the number of weddings you had been to, and funerals as well, other social events. So again, I had a whole team of people helping me out there because I don't speak Maharashtra, nor do I speak local language, which is Tamil. So I had multiple teams of translators helping me out in these interviews. But in that process, beginning to see layers of data, confirmation data, that it wasn't just me who had help from friends and neighbors and friends of friends and everyone else in the network. It was someone living in a Patnavar fishing caste village on the edge of a place called Nagapatnam, which is the name of the small city where I was in Tamil Nadu, then seeing back in time how one small area in Shibuya had these stronger connections there and how they were doing better. And then fast forward back into my interviews I was doing in 2005, 2006, back in Hurricane Katrina area, seeing over and over again that this was something that really was the book I wrote called Building Resilience. And I think that for me was this first foray away from my old topic, really trying to articulate what is it about these connections that matter. Now, I wasn't the first person, of course. There's a guy named Russell Dines a long time ago. There was a great article by Nakagawa and Shah also that I had read. But what I think I did, in my own mind at least, was quantify this not just from one experience, not just one country, but show you could measure this objectively in multiple areas. And if I could measure it, that meant other scholars could too. And that, I think, helped me get the job I have now at Northeastern, where I have a lab. And we're always, in a sense, not chasing storms, but chasing disasters. So soon after the LA fires, we got phone calls from people there to help collect data after the Colorado fires as well. And again, it's the same process. In Colorado, for example, after the fires there, we saw that people who were looking for homes, individuals with stronger social ties, they were able more quickly to find a place to go to than individuals who had weaker ties. So all these kind of things. We looked at Fukushima, the nuclear disaster in Japan. Individuals with stronger ties had better mental health outcomes. So we're seeing in so many facets of human life. By the way, Renae has a great slide that shows, she basically asks, okay, so you think this stuff matters, where does it apply? And disaster is this one little tiny honeycomb-shaped thing, and the rest of the slide is like 80 other words, healthcare, crime, outcomes of families, social, you see all these other things popping out because you realized, as human beings, we're social animals. We've known this for millennia. But we don't really think about it, unfortunately, in the disaster space because we're still tuned to this idea of we need more fire trucks, we need more berms, we need more spending on this physical infrastructure. And this concept of investing in kindness, investing in connections, investing in people falls by the wayside.
It's not woo-woo. It's actually a smart economic investment to invest in these structures. I mean, even if somebody is not a fan of humanity, I happen to be a huge fan of humanity. It should, if you don't want to stabilize, from a just for the sake of humanity, if you want to do it for the economics of it all, to stabilize a community, this is actually how you can do it. So Renae, how did you translate all of that into the work that you're doing every day? Like when you're talking about the honeycomb, like how did you do that so that the average person could understand it though?
Yeah, I think very much linked to what I mentioned before about creating descriptors. So for me, I don't care about definitions. I care about people talking about it every day. So a big part of what we're trying to do is embed it into just general conversations by people working in government roles, in not-for-profits, in communities, in businesses. So through all the programs that we deliver, we talk about social capital and the connections, trust and cooperation between people, but also make it relevant to social infrastructure. So in Australia, there's certainly a lot of funding goes into the big grey infrastructure. So the, bridges and the roads and the, fire trucks and the warning systems. And don't get me wrong, we need them. But at the end of the day, Daniel and I spent 6 weeks going around Australia, and it's like, what is the place or space that means the most to you? And top of the list, without a doubt, particularly in regional Australia, was the pub. So the pub is the place that people go and they trust, and that's where they connect. So why are we not looking at pubs? And I know there's, alcohol kind of related issues, but they're not all based on that. So why are we not looking at pubs in those regional towns and investing in the people running the pub to keep the pub open, to maybe, set the pub up as an evacuation centre or a recovery centre or whatever it might be? Because if the community is trusting there and already, comfortable to go there, and it's not just pubs, it's libraries, it's the local parks, it's the sports grounds. And Daniel's got a lot of great data around, if you ask a community what's going to bring them back after a disruption, it's not going to be the road that takes 10 years to build. It's going to be the pub, the cafe, the school. And I mean, Daniel and I, we had a few healthy arm wrestles. I won most of them. But when we were looking at, again, my role to translate it to Australia, and again, can do it to any other country, but I want to make sure that it is right for Australia, like it should be right for America or right for whatever country it is. So things like, schools. I mean, I know Daniel in other countries typically hadn't included schools, but absolutely schools are fundamental here. Again, particularly in regional communities. So schools like chemists. So, chemists in Australia, they know everyone's health issues. They know the disconnected people, the lonely people, et cetera, et cetera. So they're really fundamental. But I think moving, I guess, outside of that as well, Jennifer, when I came to present at the After the Fire Summit, and I was so grateful to come and meet you in person. It was like a real woohoo moment. But I was quite early on in presenting, and I had no idea what I was presenting. I didn't know who was going to be there. I knew people were going to be there. I had a rough idea of what might happen. But just the ahas, the yes, the wows, and then hearing every other panelist and presenter across the whole 2.5 days mention social capital and social infrastructure in their presentations and conversations absolutely cemented for me that it is global, or, at least Australia and America. There is a big need, desire, want, and opportunity to look differently at the connections and how we support connections to be strengthened.
And it is, I think this may be the best tool that we have to actually get communities on board who've not yet experienced a disaster, because we're all clear that at some point we're going to, and this is something that they can actually see, feel, touch like as you spoke about before. I think that I do think it's a game changer. I do think it will make jobs like mine easier to have something to quantify it. We need a tool to do it much easier, but it is, for me, it's a huge relief. It's why I talk about it a lot in my offline conversations with other leaders. I'm like, there is this thing out there that is going to help you. It does exist. The research has been going on for a long time, but now the applied piece of it. I think also that people, I noticed this in the LA fires right away, that people will underestimate the power of social connections to bring people back to rebuild. We had this Bravo Liberty. Bravo is a network here, and he's a real estate person, and he immediately went on all the news stations to say, the Palisades is not coming back. Those people are not going to rebuild. They're going to move on. And it's going to turn into, like, you'll have new people who move in, but nobody's staying, basically. And I usually will not troll anybody to this degree, but I certainly did him. And I made a special reel just for him with his face and my comments over it that we said, like, not everything is a commodity. Not everything is based upon the cost or the sale. They're not always making decisions about that. We make decisions based upon our social ties. And what we found, and I am pleased to say that I have seen this enough times, just as you have, is what people miss the most. They're sad about their homes, but they want each other. Even if they weren't close to their neighbors before, it turns out they have a yearning for those same people to come back, to, and they will go through hell to get there. They will show up for roles that they never anticipated that they were going to do. We bring them the system of block captains, which is very similar. I mean, it actually feeds completely into all of your work, which means that you have the you need to have trusted spaces for information too. If you don't have good information flows, then people get very confused and frustrated. Because what I want to do is really make sure that if someone's listening to this podcast and if they're a little bit lost, that we don't lose them in this moment. And I would like you to even go in more plain language. I'm going to start with the scientist here, with Daniel, and say, like, how, as a scientist, I mean, Renae's good at translating it, but how have you been translating this for 2 decades in a way that people can understand either right after a disaster and they're afraid that it's all gone, or before a disaster, which is usually a question I'd give to Renae, but I'm curious to hear it from you. Like, how has it been a struggle? How do you do it?
It is, I think, a struggle. And I think, we have seen in the own work that we do, whether it's in Australia or America, that other attempts to think about disasters often get priority, whether that's construction firms building those 6-lane highways or, new investments in technologies and new apps that are given a pride of place, rather than thinking through, do we have enough to map these communities? Do we know what's going on? Are we building their social capital through social infrastructure? I think we do see that struggle. I think we do see evidence of that things are making progress. As we mentioned, Renae was convincing enough to win that $1 million from the Australian government, which is fantastic. And the work that she's doing now is quite visible, which is also fantastic. There are now, I've been lucky enough to have 2 videos produced in North America on this exact topic of the role of social ties in disasters, getting some hits, which is nice to see. And I think FEMA, before the current administration at least, was taking the idea seriously. There actually was a whole thing, a community development section there. Unfortunately, they're closed now, but they did take that seriously. So you see at the national level. And then I know a number of communities around North America. Dan Homestead, for example, in San Francisco. There was work in Boulder, Colorado, the Boulder, Colorado Strong movement. Even in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near where I live, where social capital is mapped yearly by the local government. So you see pockets of communities where they're taking seriously, not just after a shock, but even during peacetime, recognizing that, as you said, a community with strong social ties means people walk outside at night and aren't afraid of getting mugged. Businesses have more walk-through clients because people are willing to go to their stores at different hours. People know their neighbors, are able to go away without having to worry about getting broken into. Elderly neighbors are taken care of, like ours is by us and other communities members here who knock on the door every day and check on them. So you see that, I think, in those plain language, a strong community that's connected does better always. Quality of life is higher, even if there isn't a fire or a flood or a heart attack or a tsunami. Unfortunately, the reality is, and our research shows this, the number of those kind of events, shocks, fires, disasters, is rising. It's rising because of climate change. It's rising because we're living in more dense environments. And Australia has both fires and floods. We have all kinds of stuff going on in North America. We have fires on the West Coast. We have floods and hurricanes on the East and South. So with both peacetime and wartime needs, I am optimistic that social capital is making more progress into this space. When people think about a shock, is it just the roads, infrastructure, and technology they talk about? Or did they mention the need for the community to be engaged? You mentioned the idea of coming back. We call that exit and voice. What drives someone away from a community after a shock or brings them back? Our research shows the stronger ties you have to the area, a sense of place, sense of belonging, even with high costs, even with long times of rebuilding, you're willing to come back no matter what the costs are.
Jim, what is your title in all this Build Back?
Yes, I'm the executive director of the Palisades Malibu YMCA, which is now known as the Lowe Family YMCA.
LOWE, great.
That's correct.
You know, when we talked to Team Palisades, who's doing everything, who's doing what, they were like, be sure you talk to Jim. What do you think the role of the Y is? I mean, number one, let's just say one of your roles was to give me a pass because I'm a fire victim.
All right,
so I was able to keep fit and play pickleball since the fires. But what else is going on?
Yeah, you know, we are a resource to the community. We are the center of community and well-being, a cornerstone of this community. We've been in the community since the mid-'60s.
Wow.
And we now have this great property, Simon Meadow, where we can do events like this. Our brunching with dads, where dads can come and hang out with their kids and moms get a break. We'll do another brunch, but it'll be a mother-child brunch. So doing community events just kind of continues to glue the community together and keep them together and hold them together. Our Christmas tree lot, our pumpkin patch, we did a community picnic at the pumpkin patch. We did our Ho 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 event that's been going on for 75 years in the community. We've recently been hosting it here at Simon Meadow and look forward to doing that in the future. Get 500 plus people to come to that. Giveaways of resources, gift cards and clothing and shoes and all those kind of essentials, but also free membership for those that were affected by the fires, all through 2026.
I read where you gave 3,000 memberships to people affected by the fire.
Yeah, we're at least that. We have over 1,000 family units, so you times that by 2.5, 3, and you get to that number easily. And those memberships go for Palisadians and Eaton Fire victims. So
And Malibu.
and Malibu as well, absolutely.
It's
yes.
crazy. Nobody realizes, I think in all this fire discussion, Malibu gets forgotten because of the name of the fire.
Sometimes, yes. I think you're absolutely right. And they lost over 700 homes, and it's a major impact on the community of Malibu.
And so studies show that coming together, looking each other in the eyeball, even if you're living in desperate places, really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So why do you think standing here at Simon Meadow is significant for the Y?
Well, as I said, we're the Center for Community Well-Being. And if you can't commune and don't have space to commune, you can't have that well-being. And that's what we're able to provide. And if we don't have a resource, we're able to connect you with a resource, which is great. We've owned this property since 2006, thanks to a generous gift by Bill and Cindy Simon, thus Simon Meadow.
Okay.
And we've been great stewards of this land, added different things like Winding Way, our butterfly garden, Pally Path. We've just enhanced it and continued to elevate it. And that's what we look to do in the next step, where we can bring our pool back. And that's right, you heard me.
The pool up here?
Not that pool. That's where we used to be, but we're going to put it down here at Simon Meadow on our property and have our own swimming pool for the community, and a community center, again, for seniors, teens, families, events, things like that.
So who's coming here today? You're here till about 1, I guess.
We're here till about 1. We have fathers and their kids. Boys, girls, kids, dads, everybody's here smiling, eating, and thanks to Garden Cafe for catering the event.
Yeah, and you've got basketball, boxing, football toss,
Bocce, cornhole, giant Jenga, Connect 4, we span everything.
And I think also people don't realize, well, there's kids here today, the role that the Y plays in the life of seniors.
Yeah.
I know it's so affordable, just in general, before the fire. It's so affordable, it's like, I don't know, $50, $60 a month.
Yes.
And you had senior classes, and in Santa Monica, you have open play pickleball right now at the Y. There's 28 different Ys across the LA region, right?
So you do have access to the Ys around the country with your membership. And yes, we have 29 YMCAs through LA County, from Antelope Valley all the way down to San Pedro, out to Montebello and West San Gabriel, and over here to the Palisades in Malibu.
What sort of feedback? I mean, and most have gorgeous swimming pools too, but what's been the feedback from teenagers?
Well, we are starting a teen advisory council. That's going to start here in March, and we just finished up our youth and government program, which is a model legislation and court program.
You take them to Sacramento?
And we take them to Sacramento. They take over the Capitol, and that's a statewide program ran by the LA YMCA with CalWise support. And we get kids from San Diego, San Francisco, all over the state, and they convene at a couple different events, one at Camp Roberts, and then in the fall, and then the big one is our Sacramento trip, where we actually take over the state capitol.
Yeah, and what I've noticed, Jim, about interviewing teens since the fire is they want to get on with life. They don't want to sit and grouse or cry. They want to go, okay, this bad thing happened. This is how we're going to move forward.
Yep.
And what have you learned from their energy, Jim?
Well, they need something. They need outlets. That's what they need. And so the Y, having the Teen Advisory Council, will hopefully listen to them and hear what they're needing. But we're also going to do a art therapy program. We're going to do a English handbells, and those are the handbells that you ring. So it's, kids need success, right? We all need success, right?
That's right.
But instant success is really helpful for everybody. And with handbells, all you have to do is be able to count to 4, and you can play. You don't need to read music, anything like that. So we're going to have some for seniors, and we're going to have some for teens as well.
Sort of music therapy sort of thing?
Correct, yeah. The megahertz of the ringing of the bells will actually do some therapy, but it's also the community piece that we've been talking about that also is going to give some unbeknownst therapy to kids and seniors.
Jim, I think you spent 19 years at the Y, is that right?
Yep, 19 and working on 20.
Well, thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for bringing people together. We're going to go talk to some dads and see why they came today.
Absolutely.
But without people like you, how would people remember to come back?
Agreed. It's I've been here all the way through. So was here on the 7th, actually right here in Simon Meadow when it started. Been answering the phones ever since.
And you're going to be here for the long haul, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, thanks.
Doing stuff like this, keeping our community together. I like to say, you know, what's special about the Palisades is the unity of community.
Well, this is what helps keep it that way. So thank you, Jim, for everything.
Thank you.
Hey, sir, tell me your name and what you're doing here.
Drake Walker, and I'm the program director in the areas of youth and community for the Palisades YMCA. Formerly, I was in a different role. I was one of the regional sports directors.
For all of the Ys in LA, or
For
what?
5 centers spread out throughout the valley.
Oh.
And then just recently, I received what you can consider somewhat of a promotion, and what you can really consider a great opportunity to be in this community, helping our executive director, Jim Kirtley, rebuild the Palisades YMCA and bring some more value and opportunity back to our community.
Now, what would make you come even if there's no building right now?
I actually like the fact that there's no building, right? And it makes us nomads, and it entrenches us right in the community. And we get to be really hands-on and use a lot of shared community spaces that normally we wouldn't be in. So there's a slight difference where normally the community comes to us inside of those walls, and now we're bringing our services directly to them.
Oh.
We're able to answer some questions about things that I think people were unclear about the YMCA. And now what our hope is when we bring it back, they'll see even more value. And by not having something, sometimes when you take something away,
Yep.
that's when you really see the value and appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then to bring it back with some new aspects that will really enhance what is already here. So I think that's why I'm here. It's a blessed opportunity to be a part of that and have an imprint on it personally, but being a part of our greater Y Association.
Well, I try to always talk to young people, especially teens, and see what they're feeling about post-fire. Because, their history burned down, right? Their soccer medals, a lot of them, their baby pictures, what have you. But I've noticed, we say that word resilience, but I've noticed that kids are the coolest. They're like, hey, I'm not going to live in sorrow.
Right.
I'm going to start now and go forward and make sure I work toward climate change. Building back right and smart. What have you heard from the kids? What sort of encouragement?
I appreciate being asked that question. So this question comes on the heels of our youth and government trip to Sacramento. So I spent about 4.5 days up there with some very brilliant, passionate, socially aware teenagers. And I did get to hear a lot about how they feel, and they love their community. They're excited about being heard and being seen and being thought of. And they're excited about contributing to that. And there are some that are suffering in different ways, right? Because the memories and things are different now. And this is a new normal that they're settling into. But I'm just trying to keep them encouraged, and I'm inspired by them because these are things that we went through with them. But as adults, we've been impacted differently. We are older, so maybe we have a different perspective. But they're teaching us how to navigate challenges and how to overcome different things that we feel. And so it's just been inspiring just to see them and their reaction to this, and to see their involvement now in rebuilding their community and saying, hey, we're here. Don't forget to make sure you include us.
Listen to us. We want to contribute. What about building back smart and climate change? Do you hear them talk about that?
I do. I hear them touch on a variety of topics. And I think, like I said, they're very socially aware. And losing something as valuable as their homes and something like that, and seeing their parents, it's made them become even more aware. And what they don't know, they're interested in studying. And I think we do. Fires, this is not the first time we've suffered from natural disaster. And so understanding that it could happen again, we pray that it doesn't. We should all take it upon ourselves to want to build smart, right, and build better so we don't experience something like this ever again.
I know. Well, I'm so glad they've got you. We've got a lot to do.
We do.
And I'm so glad that you're inspired by the kids.
Thank you.
So I'm going to, at the end of this comment, kick it back over to Renae, but I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding too around. They think that money is the highest indicator of whether or not somebody will come back to a community or be able to rebuild. I think we undervalue, like actually as a metaphor, but also physical as money, underfund the strength of social capital. And it seems to me that the war in Ukraine is actually one of the best indicators of what social ties can actually do in the face of something that looks absolutely impossible. And that's a different kind of disaster. But when we were watching, especially in the early years of that war, because I think we're on year 5 or something terrible, but that we were watching grandmothers who were leaning in to fight for their way of life and to fight for their country in a way that I think was wholly underestimated certainly by Russia, but even the rest of the globe completely underestimated what that would look like. So in many ways, that's almost a testament to the work that you're doing. And I wonder, how then, Renae, do we use the work that you've been doing and that you've been doing with Dr. Aldrich to really help people understand, people who are in positions of power and funders? How do you explain it to a funder, the power of this, and why it could often be, or it often is, the deciding factor when there's so much misunderstanding about disaster and recovery?
The data is really relevant to all types of disruption. So we've had a few events, including one in Bondi recently. So we're having very proactive, great conversations with the Australian government linked to social cohesion. So again, as Daniel mentioned before, the data is relevant for crime. It's relevant for, loneliness, for aging populations, for well-being, for health, for disasters. So very much a big part of what we're doing is just educating those decision makers and funders on the fact that, it's not all about the road, but the road is the bridge is the comfortable, whatever deals or however they want to measure it, they can measure it in their way. So again, it's a slow process, but we're certainly chipping away, having some very great conversations with ministers. A lot of local councils are very, very interested in it. But we're talking to those councils, don't just, purchase the sociably methodology and the data set just for disasters. Use it across your whole council. So bring in the community, the wellbeing, the crime, et cetera, the social, the community planning, et cetera. But I think one of the most amazing things that's probably happened in terms of recognition is, very shortly after we launched, I got approached by the Mohammed bin Rashid Innovation Centre from Dubai, asking me if I'd attend a potential conference. And I thought they just wanted me to buy a booth. And I was like, yeah, no, not going to happen. We're a social enterprise, nice idea. But no, they actually approached me because they were watching what we were doing. They watched what we launched. And then they were recognizing us initially as a top 50 global innovator of solutions to help governments. And we ended up being a top 10 finalist. And I was in Dubai at the start of this year meeting, all the important people and sharing what we were doing in a very amazing format. So, I find that to me is the goal. That's the outcome. If, people who want to drive change and support us to drive change, then, that's where it's going to happen. But it's a slower process than probably what I would like. But certainly we've been having amazing conversations with ministers and, senior advisors, and they're like, are you going for funding in the next funding round for such and such a grant program? And I'm like, well, I am now. So thanks for that. But the main thing for me too is that, the data is helpful for everyone. And if the majority of funders from a government perspective, they really need to get across linking ties, because linking ties at the SA1 level are going to tell them where the blocks of people are that don't connect, trust or cooperate with government. Like, hello, votes. Do you know what I mean? So for me, aside from just from a general, doing good policy and that, like, it's actually going to help you work out where you need to connect better with people to vote. And then, if the secondary outcomes from that is that you're helping people prepare or recover better. But I would say that, we should be doing it before, not wait till after the disaster to work out what the social capital and social infrastructure metrics are. We should be doing it before and then using that data to direct investment. And we've spoken to many organizations who fund things and they're like, oh, we did like a review and actually we're investing in lots of bonding ties, but our bonding ties are strong. We should be investing in bridging ties. Well, hello, there you go. The data's just shown you where you can invest better, like today. So, that's where I hope it kind of it goes, and then it just becomes a BAU way of how we measure, like everything else.
And I think it will be helpful when we all start, like you said earlier, to adopt the language of it, so we are speaking in a common language. Because one of the things that we talk about is when we walk into a community, we're looking for the people who have all of those ties, and also that we find to be ethical and effective. And I feel like we're constantly trying to educate the rest of the community that the survivors are the best. And the survivors, I mean the entire community, because everybody has to lean in, whether or not they lost a home, are the best research and development on the planet. And it's actually a far more efficient way to go forth when you are planning, your multiple ways to recover it, why you have to actually look at it as a 360. Daniel, you mentioned that FEMA has changed. Of course, our whole emergency response right now is a little bit on hold in America. Fortunately, for those who are listening from other countries, you may not know this, but we have something called a BRIC program. It's Building Resilience in Communities program. And as soon as this administration took office, then they impounded billions of dollars. And recently, those have all been returned to the communities because it wasn't a legal thing to do. And now our courts are catching up with some of these things, and I'm glad that the money is back in there. But there are some new requirements for it, and then also moving forward, this is not going to last forever. What they're talking about right now, like trying to dismantle FEMA, put it back on the states, that's just not actually going to work. We need to build what comes next. Daniel, what in a perfect world would you like to build for what comes next if you were able to have a seat at the table of FEMA and to advise them on the most efficient use of their funds and energy and resources and leaning in here? What would that look like for you in a perfect world?
Yeah, I would start by, taking the kind of frameworks that are already in place that can measure in North America social capital and social infrastructure, and say to every mayor, every municipality, every city, every county, look, before the next fire, flood, whatever's going to happen, figure out the cold spots. Where are people not connecting? Where are people distrusting the government? Where are people not knowing to get their neighbors, not leaving their homes out of fear or whatever? Where are those areas? Those are the areas where we should be spending time ahead of time to improve communities, right? We can't engineer social capital. We can build the conditions where it can grow, meaning no local mayor, no governor, no president can tell people, connect to your neighbor. This doesn't work. But we can, like with plants, create an environment where those connections grow organically, right? And we've mentioned several times already in this discussion, the idea of social infrastructure. Places and spaces like libraries, after-school programs, YMCAs, gyms, churches, mosques, synagogues, where people connect naturally. In those spaces, we know already there's huge inequity in how they're distributed. We just measured, for example, around 25 communities across North America. In none of them did we find the same distribution of any types of things like social businesses, parks, open spaces. None of them were similar. In all of the cities, a few of these smaller neighborhoods had all the goodies, and the rest kind of trickled down. By the way, that includes my neighborhood. I live in Brighton. For transparency, I live in Brighton, which is a part of Boston. We're like the bottom third in terms of parks, places, churches, and so forth. We have 1 per 1,000 people per square kilometer. Places like the North End have 3.5 of those per 1,000 people per square kilometer, meaning my kids and I, to go to a park, to go to a library, to go to some place we could connect, have either 3 times as far to go or 1/3 the access, depending how you think about this. So we know already that's Boston, and Boston thinks it's progressive and well-funded. Imagine a city in North America, many cities in North America, or in Canada, or in Australia, where, again, we have historical reasons. Some areas got all the goodies, others didn't, and current political reasons why they're getting more goodies and others aren't. Those are the spaces left in a polarized society when many of us spend our time on our phones that we can have the possibility of connection. Without taking this seriously, our societies, whether it's Australia or North America, whatever, will continue to divide politically or otherwise, and find it harder and harder to bridge that gap. So I would really want, if this is my future design and I have $100 million, whatever, to work with, and I'm doing this work, to start pushing everyone to take seriously, society is not just built on infrastructure and new apps, right? It's not just built on having roads and concrete and fixing potholes. Those are very nice things. But if I don't trust the government, it doesn't matter what you do. If I don't talk to my neighbor, it doesn't matter how nice the park is nearby, right? We need to have investments that grow those connections to each other. And until we take social capital seriously as a basic policy need, just like we take Wi-Fi or health or education, we're going to be seeing what we're seeing, which is many advanced industrialized democracies now have huge gaps where people distrust each other. For example, red and blue in America, I think green and yellow maybe in Australia, I can't remember the colors, whatever the colors are, even more than racial gaps used to be, where we would ask someone, would you allow your child to marry someone of a different race? Now it's, would you allow your child to marry someone of a different political party? And that gap's even bigger than the racial gaps used to be 65, 70 years ago when my parents were in school. So these are serious issues for us, not just for disasters, which we mentioned are growing, but just for societies. We want to have those connections. We need to take seriously the role of these ties in building higher quality societies where we can get along.
Daniel, do you think, what was the impact of COVID on all of that? Do you think, it seems like from a layman's perspective that it just exacerbated and cemented a lot of those divisions, but that must have influenced your approach.
I wrote very early on in an op-ed that the phrase social distancing was the worst choice the government could have used in our country. Because physical distancing, absolutely, right? Do not be licking someone with COVID, for sure true. But social distancing implies I shouldn't be checking on my neighbor or going for walks in the park with them, 10 feet away or whatever. Or as my son did and my children had, outdoor activities with their friends. Social distancing suppresses what is a natural human instinct. And I think that's one of the reasons we've seen a drop-off in, as my mentor Bob Putnam would say, bowling with teams versus bowling alone. Where now we have so much delivered to us via streaming. We have food dropped off at our house. I don't have to go to a restaurant anymore, right? I have home delivery for all my Walmart goods. I don't have to go shopping anymore, right? And that society that grew so much into home delivery, home access, never leaving my desk or leaving my screen meant we think less and less about what does my neighbor have? What do they need right now, right? What does my community need right now? Do I need to get out and help in some ways? And more about, is Bridgerton season 2 ready for me to stream tonight, right?
He really likes Bridgerton.
So those, actually, there's a show called Deadlock, which is about Australia. Much, much better. Fantastic show, actually. Sorry, repping a product there, but really good show about Australia. But in any case, we have built a society since COVID on convenience. Food's delivered to me. Products are delivered to me. I don't need to leave anywhere to go get out to the movie theater or to a theater or to a park or to an event. And that's really bad for us, right? We lose sight of then the ways these connections can help, because guess what? My Netflix subscription is not going to help me if there's a heart attack, as we had in my neighborhood about 2 years ago, when the neighbors got on that person well before the 911 call got through. We had a fire not even 40 feet from my house. Well before the fire trucks arrived, our neighborhood organized to get everyone out of their homes. Those are moments that Netflix can't save you and your apps can't save you and all this other technology that we think is the savior for the future. It's not going to help if you don't have those connections, right? And by the way, during fires and floods, we don't want to think about this. Most cell phone towers have about 40 hours of battery life before they're gone. So you've got 2 days to watch all your favorite shows after that flood before it's actually having to learn your neighbors' names.
So yes, it used to be less than 24 hours, and now we're supposed to be grateful that it's like 48 hours of comms will be up, but everything de-energizes, and I think that people are always very surprised by that. In every community we walk into, that they could think about it in blue sky times, like in theory, but they didn't really actually understand that they were going to lose a lot of the coping mechanisms they automatically assumed would be there. And so your coping mechanism has to become your neighbor, and you have to share what it is that you have. And nobody's going to care about your politics in that moment. They're not going to care, even if, rich or poor. They're really, it doesn't turn into a means testing. It's like, do you need this thing? Now, when you said bowling alone, it reminded me that I just watched a documentary where they were talking about the decline of clubs in America. Or maybe it was a New York Times documentary. And so I was wondering, because it must have been your colleague who was on there, because they use the exact same bowling alone analogy. And I've been thinking about this a lot, that the theory is that as social clubs have declined in America, so has our sort of civility towards each other and our connections towards each other. Renae, how do you see that playing out? Do you have the same experience in Australia, or how did that manifest there?
Like that's got to be surely a priority to get back up and running after a disaster, or invest in beforehand to keep that going and bring the community together for preparedness. So I think we have a lot of problems in Australia with I guess volunteerism is certainly on the decline, and absolutely in the emergency services kind of space. So I think it's in the States you have more paid positions. I mean, we don't have as many people here, but certainly, particularly in the regional areas, firefighters are predominantly 100%, 99% volunteers. So
ours are 80% of firefighters are, and in the rural communities, one of the things that I want to work on, it was not my idea, it was somebody from a rural community said, they also get pulled off their jobs when they have to go fight a fire, but there's no mechanism to reimburse them for all of their lost wages in already vulnerable areas, in particular the rural ones. So maybe that's a mirrored thing.
Yeah, but also, Jennifer, on that notion too, because it's exactly the same in Australia. And back in the, the fires back in sort of 2020, typically the leaders of some of those regional and rural communities own the general store or own the post office or whatever it is. And they're also the CFA or the fire captain. So they're out fighting fires, and then their business is also struggling and going under as well. So I think 100% there needs to be a bit of look at the livelihoods component when disasters occur, because if you do have people from the community out fighting fires to the detriment of them not having a livelihood, I think, that's absolutely a gap in our area as well.
So, one of the ways that I used your work, Dr. Aldrich, was during we had this big kerfuffle around fire aid here, right? This $100 million concert that happened that I was fortunate enough to be able to attend. It was the best concert I've ever been to. It was like LA at its shiniest. I think it was 4 weeks after their fires. And for those of you unfamiliar or have you forgotten, LA had 2 fires in January of 2025. They are an hour apart. Overall, they lost approximately 15,000 structures. I see it vacillate hugely. That's structures, not homes, about 11,000 homes. And what they did, they wanted to deploy the capital immediately in tranches. And the first one was about $25 million that went out to a lot of different social organizations, including like an indigenous group that helps people register to vote. Now, it could be argued that it could have been that it definitely needed to be conveyed better what their reasoning was, because it actually, unfortunately, I feel like they did the best practice, but then they were absolutely vilified in the press all the way up to the president. And there was a sitting congressman who also came after me because I was a fire aid recipient. His argument was, what could they possibly offer Los Angeles when they're based in Sonoma? I'm like, it's in the name. I don't know what else to tell you. Like, let's work this through. But I used your research in particular to show the fire aid people that they had actually followed best practices around shoring up social ties, all of the kinds of ties you're talking about, or social infrastructure rather, in order so that people could be reached who otherwise have major trust gaps, and that it was a best practice. I would wish that for everybody. My question to you is, are you ever asked around how to fund things after a disaster? Do people approach you on that?
They are actually, and Renae mentioned this obliquely earlier, one of the papers that we put together actually was for governments in Louisiana, 20 different parishes there that asked my lab to think through, okay, we have different pots of money, right? Some is a national pot of money, some is a bottom-up pot of money. Some of these plans are national-level construction plans that they've dusted the dust off and now sticking on people, or some of them are bottom-up ideas. And we tracked what happened with people and income as local governments across these parishes began to try out different experiments. And we showed pretty clearly there that those bottom-up social infrastructure investments did better at drawing people back and bringing more money back in than these large-scale construction projects, which can last 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. So yes, we actually been asked this question about when you have a shock, where should the money go? And I cannot say until I'm blue in the face, right? It should not go into new tech, it should not go into new roads or an airport. I think in Australia, Renae pointed out to me that some remote area had actually built an airport as part of their plan. Again, these processes should be a bottom-up one. How do we figure out what people want? we talked to them as we began this podcast by talking about this, right? Rather than dusting off some old plan we already had for another 10-lane highway or a huge berm or a dam or an airport, ask local residents, what would make your life feel more connected? Is it a park? Is it an after-school program? Is it a place for your kids to go rock climbing? Japan got this about 2 years after the 3/11 disasters there, where they began building closed gyms, indoor gyms for kids whose parents were keeping them indoors because they didn't want them to go outside because of radiation from Fukushima. It took a long time for Japan to switch its models and recognize we actually have to begin building indoor rock climbing gyms and indoor play spaces and all that kind of stuff, rather than letting, Fukushima, the community is it's pretty tropical. Normally kids play outside. Parents weren't letting that happen. So the government had to sort of shift there slowly and figure this out. So I think we are seeing people ask about this question, what should we be investing in after a disaster or before? And I also see people coming around, or maybe there is something to this idea of building a place to connect.
I find that really fascinating because I hadn't really thought about, especially green spaces as a measure of resiliency. Like, I know it can help with your quality of life, and it could reach into there, but actually investing in making sure that you have green spaces, because that would increase social infrastructure, is not something that I had really considered in the same way. So I like that so much. So if you're going to tell if you're going to advise a community, build more green spaces, especially maybe in a place like the Palisades, if they had, they do have places to recreate. It's why they all want to go back there, is because it's like a small town. But even if there are people who don't want to rebuild, and there's the ability to build more green spaces or pocket parks, probably a very good idea for resiliency. And also there's a physical side to it too, which is waiting out the disaster. I'm going to abandon my notes now because we are at an hour, and I'm going to ask each of you, let's start with you, Renae. What do you want to make sure that people leave this podcast understanding, and what do you hope comes into your own sphere of your business model, especially with Dr. Aldrich, how you advise globally, especially? Like, what are you hoping for, and what do you want to make sure that people know when they're leaving this podcast?
Yeah. Oh, mate. So I hope that, I guess, what we've termed the invisible infrastructure, being social capital, becomes visible, so that when anyone thinks about, a resilient, a thriving community, that the human networks, the connections, trust, cooperation is almost the first thought. Like, that would be absolutely gold to me. And I think it's possible. I think we've just got a little way to get there. But then also that, I guess, that there's an understanding across decision makers and funders that, a road and a network of people, yeah, they're different, but there's, benefits in both. So some balanced, I guess, investment would be nice. I think in Australia, like 98% of funding goes into past event recovery of grey physical infrastructure. So 98%. So 2% potentially goes into systemic things. And I think if we flip the switch, do disasters differently, I think the outcomes are going to be so much greater. And sociably, the mapping platform that we've created with Professor Aldrich, it's there. The evidence is there. So now we just need people to embed it into their policies, into their practices, and really, I guess, understand it and want to drive change with us to, benefit all stakeholder groups. So that would be, where everyone measures social capital through us, and then we can help the world be a better place, more connected.
I love that. And Dr. Aldrich, what gives you hope?
Yeah, we were really excited. We published a few weeks ago a new guideline for medical professionals, where they might ask you questions about, are you drinking? Are you suicidal? Do you use drugs? We've actually now published public health guidelines on social connectedness, the questions that doctors, RNs, and nurses can ask their patients to get a feeling for, are they sufficiently connected in a society that often emphasizes loneliness, isolation, and anomie? So I'm very excited about that we now have this publication. It's getting about 40,000 hits so far, which is fantastic. That plus, I think the progress we're making with people like Renae is relentless. I would say promoters of social capital. And also in North America, we even have a new way of measuring social capital here, again, for free, using publicly available data. So we really want people to take this seriously in their lives and not think about this as a Cinderella service that, oh, when it's gone, I do wish I'd made more friends kind of moment, but really take seriously in peacetime, well before that next shock, a fire, a heart attack, a flood, if something shows up. Recognize the degree to which we really need human connection. And are we getting enough of it, right? We get plenty of other things. Most of us have great Wi-Fi access. We have 5G networks. Fantastic. We have tons of social networks, but are they really connecting us, right? When you're on X, when you're on Facebook, do you really feel that? Or have you gone to a picnic nearby? Have you gone to a religious event nearby? Have you gone to a park? Have you gone to a library? One of my students right now is literally spending 5 hours a day in a library taking notes. And she is just loving that time she has there because she sees the huge swath of humanity that's coming through that door for free into a public space and getting all kinds of cool stuff. It's cool in the summertime. It's hot in the wintertime. It provides a place for younger kids. New migrants are learning English there. People are filing their taxes there. Kids are playing video games together there. So all those things from a single space. Imagine if as a society we took more seriously, right, the need to connect and actually emphasize that not only, like we are right now on a podcast, but in the policies that we have, in the schooling that we have, in the education that we teach our kids, all those things that really build society to be a better place.
I wouldn't be surprised if you weren't tucked into the male loneliness epidemic. Do you know? I wouldn't be surprised at all if somehow that didn't... some work didn't arise out of that for you, because is it already come your way?
Unfortunately, yes, the gender differences are quite obvious. That, unfortunately, many men do not take seriously the recognition that the 5 friends they made in high school be there in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And oftentimes, especially, by the way, as people retire, right, the networks they built are also disappearing. So there are a number of places, critical junctures, especially in men's lives, when without active investment in these ties, thinking about them, prioritizing them, like we prioritize other stuff, right? Some people walk every day, which is great. They don't eat too much meat, which is great, or they don't smoke, whatever. But to think for a second, do I have a network that supports me when I need emotional support? Do I have someone beyond a spouse? Or if I'm single, in an area nearby? That is not the kind of conversation we're having yet. So I think that's really important, especially for men who are listening to this podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to say I'm really excited because you're both coming to the summit this year and you're going to expand on where you started last year. And we're very honored to have you both. And I get to meet Daniel in person, which I have not yet. And so I'm very happy about that. I really appreciate, as a nonprofit leader and somebody who's also poured their entire life into the space of disaster and trying to help people be not only recover, but to have hope and to understand they can find it within each other. But you're putting actual science to it and applying it and translating it. And it makes a person like me feel a sense of hope and also relief, because we know it's true. We witness it all of the time. But how to translate that and how to show it, though, is I think people don't even quite understand yet the impact that's going to have on how we operate in the world. And I just really appreciate both of you so much for spending this time with us, and also for the work that you're doing. And that I get to use you I get to refer people to you, and it gives them a lifeline in a time when it's pretty, people are pretty stressed right now. And so I appreciate all of the ways that your work is impacting the world so positively. So thank you for being with us on How to Disaster, Dr. Daniel Aldrich and Renae Hanvin. We'll drop all of your information below so people can check out your work, reach out to you so that they can do that through us. And I look forward to the next time that we meet again. Thank you.